I often get people asking me about the black-eyed children, their origins, those weird eyes, and more. So, with that in mind, I thought today I would share with you a summary of the black-eyed children mystery. It would be overly simplistic to suggest they are merely the offspring of the Men in Black. Admittedly, though, there are some similarities. The headgear and the pale skin are two things. And also, like the Men in Black, the black-eyed children are definitive supernatural drainers of energy. The story really begins with a man named Brian Bethel, a journalist working for the Abilene Reporter News. It was late one night when Bethel's life was changed and he came to realize that there are dangerous supernatural entities in our midst. It was close to 10 p.m. when Bethel's had the kind of close encounter that one never ever forgets. He had pulled up at a mall not too far from his home to deposit a check in a mailbox. All was quiet and dark. Bethel, using the lights of the mall to illuminate the interior of his vehicle, was writing the check when he was rudely interrupted. He jumped with surprise at the sight of a couple of kids who were standing next to the car, on the driver's side. But there was something about these kids that rang alarm bells in Bethel's head. In fact, as Bethel would immediately learn, things were wrong in the extreme. Bethel stared at the pair and couldn't fail to see just how incredibly pale the face of one of the boys was. The other had what Bethel described as olive-colored skin. Both boys were around 10 to 14 years of age, Bethel estimated, and both were dressed in pullovers. Only one of the two boys spoke. He claimed that they wanted to see a movie, Mortal Kombat, at the local cinema. But there was a problem. They had left their money at home. Could Bethel take them to their homes to get some cash? Bethel near instantly realized that this whole situation had an air of dark and disturbing theater about it. There was an undeniably unsettling agenda at work, and it had absolutely zero to do with movies. Bethel awkwardly hemmed and hawed for a few moments, something which caused the talkative boy to become even more insistent. Bethel led them in the car. Then things became downright eerie and chilling. Bethel found himself almost mind-manipulated, to the point where, to his horror, he could see that his hand was hidden to the driver's side door, with the intent of opening it, but without his control. Bethel, fortunately, broke the enchanting spell and didn't open the door after all. This clearly incensed the talkative boy, who amped up the pleas to allow them into Bethel's car. It was then, for the first time, that Bethel finally got a good look at their eyes. Bethel stated,
"They were coal black, no pupil, no iris."
The two boys realized that by now they were losing the battle to be permitted to get into Bethel's car. On this very point, Bethel himself said that the boy who did all of the talking wore a mask of anger. The boy, now displaying a look on his face which was part frustration and part anger, almost shouted,
"We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. Let us in."
Bethel, terrified, did nothing of the sort. What he did do was to slam the car into reverse and head for home, completely panicked by the whole thing. Oddly, as he drove away, Bethel looked back, only to see that the boys were nowhere inside. In what was clearly an impossibly quick time, they had vanished. And this was quickly born a legend. It's a legend that shows no signs of stopping. It's only getting worse. Here is another case that demonstrates the weirdness of the black-eyed children controversy. Martin York got the shock of his life when he was confronted by a boy and a girl, both around 11 or 12 years of age and with large, black, eerie-looking eyes. The girl was dressed in jeans and a long-sleeved black top, while the boy had the almost ubiquitous black hoodie. Both looked sickly and scrawny, and if they needed a hearty meal, in them. Little did Martin know that this was exactly what they were there for. Hardly a fan of the supernatural, Martin had never heard of the black-eyed children phenomenon and could only stand and stare at their curious faces, assuming at first that this was some kind of joke. But the black-eyed children were certainly not laughing. They stood together, hand in hand, looking at Martin with expressions of their faces that were paradoxically lacking in emotion but which also gave off airs of highly charged malevolence. Echoing Brian Bethel's encounter back in the 1990s, Martin said that when the girls said they were homeless and needed something to eat, it all seemed very much like a ruse, as if they had spoken the words time and time again. It was like a carefully crafted scheme on their part. Most disturbing of all, for a few moments Martin felt transfixed, almost hypnotized, by those large black eyes. He could not understand why he did not quickly shut the door at the sight of those terrible eyes. Martin could only say that it was like he was somehow being prevented from shutting the door on the pair. One might be justified in saying Martin had been placed in a state of full-blown mind control. At that point, Martin suddenly felt deathly ill. It was, he said, as if he hadn't eaten in days. He himself was suddenly starving, and it was the children who needed to eat. The pair stared intently at Martin, who found himself getting weaker and weaker, and weaker still. Crashing might be a more ideal term to use. Martin found himself barely able to move, not because he was being prevented from moving, but because physically speaking, he simply did not have the energy to even stand up. It was, Martin said, as if he was himself being eaten alive by the paranormal pair of ghoulish things in his midst. After a few minutes, both the girl and the boy turned and left, still holding hands. Martin finally managed to crawl to his bedroom, where he lapsed into a deep sleep. He did not wake until well into the following afternoon. For the next 3 or 4 days, the overwhelming weakness, made worse by bouts of dizziness and a bad taste in his mouth, kept him in bed. It was almost a week later before he finally felt fully back to normal. While Martin has no idea as to what the black-eyed children were or are, he believes they were not human and somehow had drained him of energy. One final case will be enough to get the picture. The story was given to me by the great-granddaughter of the witness, a woman who I have dubbed Jane. Her experience is an interesting one, as it demonstrates that the black-eyed children phenomenon is not a relatively new one that most people assume it is to be. Jane, unfortunately, is no longer with us. She died in 1992 at the age of 87. Jane's granddaughter contacted me in 2016 to share the details of the encounter, which all of the family had heard of, and which was kind of like the definitive skeleton in the closet. Everyone knew of it, but no one really wanted to talk about it. At least, that is, until Jane's granddaughter related the facts to me. At the time of her encounter, Jane was just 18 years old. This would have put her encounter in 1923, which is astonishing, given that the black-eyed children phenomenon is assumed to be one of fairly modern times. Jane and her family were living in a small town in eastern Louisiana. Times were hard, and family of 7 struggled to make ends meet. If that were not enough, it was in January 1923 that Jane had her first encounter with what can only be described as one of the black-eyed children. It was in the early hours of one particular morning that Jane awoke, unable to move and unable to speak, as a young boy, dressed in black, stretched out his hand and pointed at her. Instantly, she began to feel ill and lacking in energy. The paralysis and the inability to scream made things worse still. Then, suddenly, it was all over. The paralysis was gone, and so was the boy in black. Jane, practically hysterical, woke her parents and told them of what had happened. The most terrifying part of the encounter? The boy's black eyes. For the next 3 nights, the boy returned. The story was the same every night. The boy with the black eyes would manifest next to Jane as she lay in bed, unable to move an inch. As per the first time, he would reach out, the result of which was again a sudden feeling of overwhelming weakness. I thought the boy never returned again. It took Jane, like Martin decades later, days to get back to her normal self. Notably, in the immediate aftermath of the encounter, Jane had a series of nosebleeds, something which often occurs in paranormal situations. And she took a slightly jaundiced appearance, which was most definitely not a good sign. The story would undoubtedly have never surfaced had it not been for the fact that on one occasion in 2014, Jane's great-granddaughter was channel flipping and was confronted by a TV show that in part was focused on the black-eyed children. Amazed and more than a bit disturbed, she realized that it was that Jane had encountered all these decades earlier, an energy-sucking thing that saw Jane as a convenient source of nutrition. So, with all of that said, what exactly might the black-eyed children be? The undeniable expert in this field is David Weatherly, a Texas-based author and paranormal investigator who has investigated dozens and dozens of black-eyed children-themed experiences. Notably, Weatherly suggests that the black-eyed children may actually be the jinn, Middle Eastern entities which also fed on human energy. On this issue, Weatherly says in his book, The Black-Eyed Children, as master shapeshifters, it would be no problem for the jinn to take the guise of a black-eyed kid. Likewise, the chaos created in the lives of those who met the children matches the pattern of the jinn's desire to create trouble for humans. He adds, with an air of warning, if the jinn are by chance behind the rush of black-eyed children encounters, the problem of the black-eyed kid may be much more significant than it first appeared.
I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe to support this kind of content. See you on the next travel.